Hello, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Miles Selleck. I'm the Chief Executive of TheCityUK. Delighted to have all of you here with us this afternoon, whether that is physically here in the room, and what a pleasure it is to be back together doing physical meetings again, or virtually joining us via Zoom. A quick update. We were due to be joined by Catherine Finn, PwC Senior Partner and Regional Leader in Wales and the West for PwC. And for the purposes of this discussion, also the TheCityUK City Chair for Cardiff. Unfortunately, Catherine has had a positive COVID test and can't be with us today, so we wish her a very speedy recovery. On a note of admin for today's event, if you have a question to raise, if you're in the room, can you please put your hand up in the old-fashioned way? I'm sure the muscle memory will be there. If you are not, then please do send your question via the chat function to the TheCityUK questions. I'd also recommend that online viewers switch to speaker view by using the option in the top right-hand corner of your screen. This event is a particularly important one for TheCityUK. Promoting the critical role of financial and related professional services across the UK is at the heart of all that TheCityUK does, and it is one of our strategic objectives. Of the 2.3 million people who work in our industry, 2/3 of them are outside the M25, and I think some of you will have heard me say it is not an official TheCityUK meeting unless that statistic has been quoted. Our industry, as people may be familiar with, is the biggest net exporting industry in the UK, and importantly, half of those exports come from outside London. The TheCityUK has built a network of 7 city chairs in each of the significant regional industry hubs in our country, from Bristol to Birmingham, from Cardiff to Belfast, Manchester to Leeds and Newcastle. These are the frontline practitioners who underpin and bring together a network of industry partners and other regional economic partners in each region and nation. The city chairs are the industry's ambassadors across the country. And in addition, we also have a very close partnership with our friends and colleagues at Scottish Financial Enterprise. At our recent national conference in Bristol, we were pleased to hear from the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, John Glenn, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, and new Parliamentary Undersecretary for Levelling Up, Neil O'Brien. It was encouraging to hear from them how they saw our industry's critical role in levelling up in the UK. And so our annual report, Enabling Growth Across the UK, which we're launching today, sets out how this unique ecosystem of financial and related professional services operates on a region-by-region basis, making its contribution the employment and to the economy. And our research demonstrates that in every region and nation of the UK, financial services jobs are more productive than jobs in any other sector and offer higher average salaries. The success of London as a global financial centre is vital to the success of these regional clusters, and we would argue vice versa. Major international firms with bases in the capital are expanding operations across the country and benefiting from the UK's diverse pool of talent. This year, Goldman Sachs made a huge investment in Birmingham, bringing many high-skilled jobs to the city, and Barclays has recently opened an impressive state-of-the-art campus in Glasgow. This report also comes at a crucial time as the government continues to develop its vision for what levelling up means in practice. Most commentators agree that greater devolution will be a key part of this agenda, and so it's a particular pleasure to have with us today one of the most high-profile regional leaders in the UK, Andy Street, the Mayor for the West Midlands. We're delighted to welcome him, and we'll be hearing more from him shortly. But firstly, it's my great pleasure to introduce Angelika Klaarderij, TheCityUK's Chief Economist and Head of Research, to present the report and its key findings. Angelika.
Thank you very much, Miles, and good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed great to see everybody here, both in the room and online, for the launch of our latest economic research. I thought I would start, as I normally do, by putting the research in its broader context. So we're going to be talking today about the financial and related professional services industry's contribution to the regions and nations. But I did want to start by just reminding you very briefly of its economic contribution overall. So could we get to the next slide, please? There we go. These points are already probably quite familiar to you. There on the right, you see the famous 2.3 million job statistic that Miles just mentioned as our CityUK calling card, if you like. So it is just worth remembering as, before we get into our more detailed discussion, that the industry is indeed a major employer, a major taxpayer, and it does account for around 10% of overall UK economic activity. So that is the national contribution, but as I said, we are here today to talk about the regional contribution made by the industry. And that is, in fact, particularly important in light of the government's levelling up agenda, as Miles just mentioned. And so I wanted to share this slide, which I think reminds us of the importance of that agenda. So this shows you the overall growth rates of each region and nation over the past decade. This is for the economy as a whole, it's not just for financial and related professional services. And what you can see is not only the pretty significant variation in the economic performances of the regions and nations, you can also see, because I've highlighted the UK average in red there, you can see that the overall annual average growth rate of around 3.5% is in a way kind of being supported by growth in London and in West Midlands in particular. Now, obviously, the levelling up agenda is really wide-ranging and encompasses the whole range of socio-economic aspects. But this blunt, and it is indeed very blunt, this blunt headline metric of GBA growth, I think does give us a sort of starting point from which many of the other issues end up following. And so now we come to the role that financial and related professional services can play. So these graphics are both from the research that we're launching today. The chart on the left shows you that financial services productivity is around twice as high as productivity in the UK economy as a whole. So to measure this, we used ONS data on output per job. That is one standard measure of productivity. Others you could look at our output per hour or output per worker. But looking at output per job, it is around £58,000 for the economy as a whole. It's around £115,000 for financial services. And that difference is in evidence not only for the UK overall, but also for every single region and nation within the UK. So just to give you an example, in the East Midlands, overall productivity was around £49,000 by this measure. Financial services productivity was around £74,000. Now, if you were to look at an economics textbook, you would find out all this standard stuff about the link between productivity and wages. And so the table on the right, I think, in a way, kind of complements the data that I just talked through, because it highlights that across the UK, median earnings in financial services are higher than median earnings in the economy as a whole. So the UK average is around £26,000 overall. It's around £40,000 for financial services. Again, that's UK-wide, but once again, that kind of discrepancy, that gap exists in every single region and nation. Although, of course, the size, the scale of the gap does vary from region to region. And so now we come to the core of our new research, which is summarized in graphic form here. What we've done is quantify the contribution that financial and related professional services makes to each UK region and nation, measured by industry employment and industry GBA. So here you can see in very broad terms the spread of that contribution. The figures that you see on the graphic are the employment contribution, and the shading on the map shows you that financial and related professional services represents anywhere from around 5% of GBA in regional economies, in regions like the East Midlands, up to around 9% in Scotland, 19% in London. And you can see the contribution in a different way here. We talk about financial and related professional services clusters, and these are towns and cities where particular industry subsectors have employment of more than 5,000 people. So to give you an example, Swindon has more than 13,000 financial services jobs, but fully 7,000 of those are in banking, and so we would describe that as a banking cluster. Now, obviously, some cities have multiple clusters. Newcastle, for example, Newcastle has more than 13,000 people in financial and professional services employment, but there are particularly strong clusters of banking and legal services activity. So of that 13,000 in overall industry employment, banking accounts for around 25% of that, and legal services accounts for another 29%, almost 30%. So those are just some examples. There is, of course, a vast literature analyzing the importance of these sorts of clusters for economic development overall. But in summary, I guess the key thing is it's really around the economics of agglomeration and especially the implications for productivity. So that's really a snapshot. But in terms of our research, we do have reams of detailed data, as you can see here. We break down industry employment in GBA by regions and cities. We also look at data in the different subsectors of banking, insurance, fund management, and legal and accounting and management consulting services. Now, obviously, it's not really possible to read all of the data on the slide, and of course, we don't have time to go through it all in detail here this afternoon, but I do encourage you to take a closer look at the research in your own time. You can see here that we have also been able to drill down to industry employment at the constituency level. And again, if you're interested in the details, just please do speak to me after the event or feel free to get in touch later. And a final feature of the research, which I would like to highlight, is the 16 policy recommendations that we've included as suggestions for how the industry's ability to support individuals and businesses can be enhanced. So we grouped these into 8 themes. Again, I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but you can see just a few thematic examples here. Presented examples around devolution, green and sustainable growth, and skills. But we do also have recommendations in areas like SME finance, exports, infrastructure. So again, please do take a look at the full report in your own time. And so just to wrap up, I think the message that I would want to leave you with is that financial and related professional services is a structurally important industry for the UK and the UK economy. And its contribution is felt across the whole country, not just in London. And it's really the second part of that message that is the focus of the research that we are launching today. So I hope that's given you a sense of our new report and the scope of the research in this area. So with that, thank you, and I'll hand back to Miles.
Angelica, thanks very much for that. That was absolutely fascinating. A lot of food for thought. I'm sure our panel will be looking at that in more depth shortly. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Andy Street. Andy is one of those people who actually needs very little introduction, but I hope you will indulge me and allow me to explain and remind people that he was elected Mayor of the West Midlands region in 2017 and re-elected earlier this year. He brings a wealth of business experience to the role and led John Lewis with distinction for many years. During that time, he was recognised by the Queen for services to economic growth and appointed to CE in 2015. He was also recognised by management today as their most admired business leader. He is a strong and tireless advocate for West Midlands and for business generally, and we're delighted that he's here today to help launch our enabling growth across the UK report. Please welcome Andy Street.
Thank you very much. Too generous, and Angelica, thank you. I mean, my first reaction is thank you, because I didn't actually know what you were going to say. So responding to the report, I had some trepidation, but I assumed it wasn't going to say that Birmingham and the West Midlands is a basket case, because otherwise you would have invited me. So I'm encouraged by what you say, and I will come to the individual points in your report in a moment. I want to say thank you for those from the West Midlands who are in the room to support us, lots of familiar faces, and hopefully you will recognise the story that I'm going to tell. I also should, of course, right at the beginning, thank Emma for suggesting that I should do this. So lovely that after she left the dirty art of politics, she's got a proper job now. Anyway, so it's great to be able to do this at a really good time for the West Midlands, because as you said in your introduction, we've had some really good news in this sector recently. And of course, that was the news that Goldman Sachs is setting up their second UK headquarters in Birmingham. And of course, for us, it's an incredible coup if you think their search was everywhere that they describe, and this is where I disagree with them, but never mind. They describe the second cities in the UK and indeed second cities across Europe. And for Birmingham to come out top of that selection was an incredible vote of confidence. And of course, it's on the back of the story of HSBC moving their retail bank headquarters to the city. Time flies over 3 years ago now since they opened that facility. And reflecting on the day that Goldman had their opening event, we did it at the Grand Hotel in Birmingham. There's a sort of symbolism, because this place had been sort of derelict for 20 years. It was the hallmark, sort of landmark hotel in the city centre. Derelict for 20 years, I called it a monument to stagnation. But it was back there in its glory from 1875, and it got a wonderful billing as the place for doing that event. And we even got a write-up in the New York Times round of efforts for it. But I love actually what the Times here and the Telegraph had to say about it. And they asked the question, was Birmingham going to challenge London in financial services? Well, we can all dream, but I think within your research, we can say that's quite happening yet. So, but a great time to do it. The data you called out, you started off with this point about 2/3 of the jobs in your sector are outside London. I know you always use that phrase, but I wanted to just call it out right at the beginning as well, because it is an absolute standout point. And of course, it's what's so often misunderstood. If you look at our strength in this sector, it's very clear. It goes back to wonderful origins. I don't know that many of you in the room will know that 2 of Britain's biggest retail banks now were founded in Birmingham. The Midland Bank, as it came back as HSBC, but perhaps not as well known, Lloyds Bank, founded in Dayland in Birmingham in 1765. So we were the provenance of 2 of Britain's biggest institutions. So it's only right that this sector is now once again incredibly vibrant in the West Midlands. Now, the data I have is slightly different. We, of course, do our definition of the sector. I think we include a lot more professional services than you do. Looking at your pie chart, it was actually quite limited to the financial services piece. We included all the property services, which is a critical part. And so our own data says that this sector is now the biggest employer in the West Midlands. We claim 180,000 people, but it's a much broader definition than yours. What I think is obvious, though, is that it's a huge employer in the West Midlands, as indeed it is in Manchester, Newcastle, and Leeds, and Sheffield. We saw that on the data. Just to give you a relativity, though, if you think we talk of the West Midlands in the heart of the automotive industry, that has 45,000 people now. Your sector has 180,000 people. Worth reflecting. If you think of the value added in the sector, it's obviously even more staff. And on our measure, we've got this sector contributing just over 30% of our GDP. And of course, as you saw on the very first graph, the growth that we've seen in the West Midlands economy over the last 10 years of the pandemic was really encouraging. And this sector has grown faster than that average line there. Last 5 years, our growth has been 30% in 5 years. So it's clearly driven that overall performance. And the point you made about it being an export are very important as well. I was talking to John earlier, asking him how much of his business is international business written in Birmingham. And he said over 50%. Our stat for how much is either international or into another region of the country is over 66%. So it's clearly not just servicing local companies. It is an international service centre based in Birmingham, earning that exporting money. Also very fit for the future. It's on the cutting edge of new technology adaptation, and one thing we didn't call out, but we were very pleased to see the government report earlier in the year in the fintech sector, where tech is making the biggest impact. I think it was called the Khalifa report, you will all know, and we were called out as one of the 3 leading sectors in the country. And perhaps the last thing I'd just draw out is employing a really broad cross-section of young people in the West Midlands. 40% of the employees in the financial services sector in the West Midlands are from BAME background, which is pretty much bang on with the proportion of our population from their background. So lots to celebrate, and perhaps one of the last things to call out in the celebrations is its role in drawing in investment from overseas. One of the things that have driven the West Midlands outperforms the rest of the country, excluding London, in your first graph, was the inward investment performance. We've been the top region for 5 years in a row, and it's been concentrated in advanced manufacturing and financial services. So again, clear evidence that it's drawing that inward investment. Now, in terms of your report, I should offer some responses to what you have said, and I punt at what you might say, because I haven't read it in detail, but one of my spies have seen some things. So to call out one or two of the things I think are so important in growing this sector originally. First one is one you didn't have on your summary slide of recommendations. I think it's absolutely critical. It's this question of infrastructure and connectivity. The inward investors who we hear from say we came into Birmingham because of its connectivity, because that's improving fast. If you ask HSBC why they came, there's two things: talent, which we're going to come on to, and this issue that it could serve the whole of the country from Birmingham, and particularly that connection to the City of London was improving all the time. So critical for us that the government rolled their dice in favour of HS2 being connected through the West Midlands. We will be the hub of that. We will be the interchange centre, the spine of transport. Fast lines now, we know, to London already being built. And just to confirm, and of course the Nottingham, really important for us. But as well as that, it's the local connectivity as well. And one thing that London has had far better than any regional city is a proper integrated transport system. And there's lots of academics write stories of how that lack of connectivity hold regional cities back. Slowly, steadily, things coming in the West Midlands, whether it's a train network, a tram network, the active travel networks, and want to cycle to work. So we're absolutely, I would describe it as catching up in that respect. And then, of course, there's digital connectivity. And one of the things I think we've done, committed to be a modesty, a pretty good job at, is this question of the 5G connectivity. I don't know if there are many Londoners in the room, but I have to tell you, Birmingham is the best connected city for 5G technology, roughly twice as well connected in terms of proportion of population are able to access 5G facilities, twice as well connected as London. And lots of our companies are now beginning to think about the application of this technology. And it's an area where we are determined to stay well ahead of any other location in the UK for attractive business in the future. Second area you did call out on your slide, it's top left of your slide, skills and talent. I think this is the single biggest issue and opportunity for our regional cities. You asked Goldman Sachs why they chose us over Barcelona and Lyon, they're able to say Manchester, and it was one word: it was talent. They thought that they would be able to recruit the people they needed to make their company great. And interestingly, they set up saying it will be an IT hub, and they are now saying it will be a full service headquarters because they've seen the talent that is available. And interestingly, HSBC story, it's a headquarters of a national bank, and they have been able to recruit all the jobs they wanted locally. And I would admit 5 years ago, I was thinking, will they find the experts in actuarial functions? Will they find the experts in technical areas? And they have. And that gives us a huge opportunity. And you're seeing it in how young Londoners are voting with their feet in terms of this talent supply in regional cities. So stat I love, and I had slides that had a pie chart up, because it shows where young Londoners are relocating to. More young Londoners relocate to the West Midlands, and twice as many to Greater Manchester, 3 times as many to West Yorkshire, 4 times as many to the West of England. And well, if you get a good job, you can have a good positive life, the kids can probably go to a reasonable school, and of course, the green space is not far away. And I haven't mentioned this obviously, the money goes a lot further than buying homes. So that talent, whether we are buying it in the migration or, of course, training our own people, is critical. And just one of the stats around this, it's held us back historically, the lack of skill, particularly in some of our peripheral areas of the West Midlands. If you go to Birmingham, if you go towards Wolverhampton, their skill level isn't as good as it needs to be. But just in 1 year, we've got 70,000 more people trained up to level 3. So we can be attracting business that is steadily improving. Third thing you called out is right, evolution. accelerating the progress to evolution. I would say, and then to that, thank you for calling it out. Maybe I'm biased, but the point is really simple. You've got a regional economic plan strategy, someone with their hands on how this is being steered. I don't think it's despotic. Hopefully it's collective. We come together to create that plan, and it links together with the transport structures, it links together with the training structures to make sure we can do that attraction. To be honest, there's still in the foothills of genuine evolution in the UK. We're optimistic that Michael Gove is going to take a bold decision, and obviously the really big one, which will be controversial, is some form of financial evolution. Because at the moment, frankly, we're asking for handouts from London. We're not self-sufficient. We don't have control of the taxation that we have at that level locally. So lots more that can be done on that agenda to create the conditions of success. And then the last one, I am not actually clear of the potential here, but I do know it's very important to your sector and to my place. And that was another one again you had on the slide. Genuinely, I've not seen the slides, so that is embarrassing for me. Is this whole question of the move to net zero? What opportunities are there for different financing models? It's going to be an area of huge growth for you. I can see all your businesses tentatively thinking about how they do this. We know we've got to bring different finance to support the move to net zero, whether it be, frankly, some of the most obvious things in the public sector, funding about transport, funding about retrofitting, but more importantly, the funding of the new businesses, which are frankly starting up all the time. One other stat about the West Midlands, the fastest growing sector is now the green growth sector. 90,000 people employed in that sector already, so rapidly growing. But we know we're really in the foothills of the financing, the growth, the great opportunity. And we, in a sense, don't just want to benefit from that. We want to think about how we can become a centre of that industry as well. So I hope what you get from that is an utter endorsement of your report. Thanks to Miles, to you and your team for what you do to shine the spotlight on this, because for the regional economy, this is absolutely mission critical. And actually, for that to you both said, I genuinely believe that this sector can provide some of the answers to levelling up. It can provide the social mobility for the youngsters in Walsall, Wolverhampton, or Dudley. And equally, it can definitely equalise that growth pattern that we saw in the very first graph. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for those comments. I think that was a genuinely inspirational report. I think you're a peak of what might be able to be done. And we share your hopes for what we'll be hearing from Michael Gove in the coming weeks. We now move to our panel discussion. It gives me great pleasure to hand over to our panel chair, Emma Reynolds, the Managing Director of Public Affairs, Policy and Research. And I ask for her panelists in the room, Andy and John Whitehouse, to join her. And we have Carys Roberts, the PR joining virtually.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. This is a very exciting afternoon for us because it's our first in-person report launch. And thank you to all of you who've come in person, and thanks to all of you who have joined online. So, Andy, I'm going to introduce you first, but you don't need much introduction. Thanks so much for what you said. I was having a little laugh to myself because I remember being a customer of Midland Bank and having my first checkbook when I was a youngster growing up in Wolverhampton. So thank you for what you said about the contribution of our industry to the West Midlands economy, and I'll be asking you a number of questions about that. And John Whitehouse from Barclays, Group Government Relations at Barclays, and also a Midlander, I believe, having grown up in Walsall, is that right? Yeah. So, Sandy, you're surrounded by the West Midlands. So there we go.
Is there anyone in the room who's not from the West Midlands?
And John is a very important person for the City UK because he chairs our public affairs group and is a member of our board. And previously, John worked for Lloyds and indeed in the House of Commons previous to that. So thank you, John, for being on the panel. And Carys is on the screen. Thank you, Carys, for being with us. You're not poorly, but we understand your partner is. We wish him all the best in getting well. So thank you for joining us virtually. Carys Roberts is the Executive Director of the IPPR. And we're really looking forward to having your contribution, Carys. We know that you previously worked at the RSA, Social Mobility Foundation, and the IFS. So thanks for all being here. Andy, You said in your opening remarks that the contribution of our industry was particularly significant to the West Midlands. I just wondered whether you could talk us through, you're one of the first Metro mayors re-elected this year. How do you think the partnership is working between local government in the West Midlands and the relatively new office of Metro Mayor and the private sector, but particularly our industry, but the private sector more generally, in helping the government drive its levelling up agenda?
Well, oddly enough, there's some people in the room who could probably answer better how it's working with the private sector. You should ask them. But I actually think that one of the reasons we've done relatively well at growing this sector, because it's arguable whether we're the biggest or Manchester the biggest, I don't really care. But what I think is not arguable is the growth in the West Midlands in recent years. And I think one of the reasons for that is that private sector organisations are pretty well connected in with the public policy piece in the West Midlands actually. They have a number of bodies that sort of bring them together. One that I think is very important is the Growth Company, which is our investment agency, which actually took a decision, unlike most areas of the country, that it has a private sector-led board. I think that has been a good deal and sort of connected in dotted line to us. So I actually feel that they are pretty well represented in terms of driving our local plan. Where I think we're still feeling our way, if I'm very honest, is what you might call a sector strategy from central government. Controversial, but it's what I think, so I'll say it. I think we were probably a little closer to it in Theresa May's time when we had these local industrial strategies, and we were very clear in calling out that this sector was one of our nodes of growth alongside promoted I love this. And we were working very actively with them then on what that actually meant. It's become a bit more less there, if I'm honest. And one thing we are now trying to do on the back of the pandemic is be really clear in our own strategic economic planning, which sectors, which clusters are we really going for, and then we've still got work to do, if I'm honest, and then really understand that and understand some of the specific support we might need to do.
That actually goes to the second question I was going to ask you, which is about the role of Whitehall and the role of regional government and particularly your position as Metro Mayor. How do you think that's working out? Because it's a relatively new position, Metro Mayor, and I know it's a few years ago, but our parliamentary democracy is many years in the making, and it's great that you're blazing this trail. How do you think it's working out between the two?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is well, first thing says it's still very young. We have got to be realistic in our expectations, and your question is very respectful about that. I always chuckle when I say there's been a mayor of Coventry for 800 years. I've been around 4 years. Let's keep expectations in balance. I think the answer is some areas of government have really understood what this model can do. Others are a little behind. The best example, clearly transport, and it's probably the obvious thing. What was the Mayor of London famous for when it became instant and all of this stuff about the tube? And he in a sense defined the role through that, and well done him. And I think if you get someone like Grant Shapps, he really gets how having one person responsible for this can be really very powerful. And then they have brought recently a lot of cash on the table for Metro Mayors combined authorities to spend. I think another really good area, and some great work with MXCLG, as it was called, feedback around this whole brownfield regeneration and more cash that is needed for the regeneration process. And obviously house building numbers is something I'm very proud of. We came their house building numbers through a collaborative process with all local authorities. So again, you get another example of an area that's really understood the convening power of the mayor. Then you get other areas where it's been very difficult, if I'm honest. And one of my biggest frustrations has been DFE, and I'm really optimistic that is a new room, and you will see the potential of this. Because coming back to your observation, you have to evolve attached that's going to drive the skills system to get the people qualified. So the honest answer is it's some and some. But you know what? I'm quite relaxed about that. It's quite young.
You are young and enthusiastic and energetic, and thank you for being so open with us. I think that's really refreshing. John, Barclays, as we've all seen earlier this year, opened a new state-of-the-art campus in Glasgow. Can you talk us through how important the different offices that you've got around the country, and particularly in Glasgow, are to Barclays overall.
Sure. So I guess first thing to say is that this is not new. This is something that's been happening for decades and over 50 to 60 years. So in the 1960s, there was a drive to move operations out of London into the regions of a form of devolution. And Barclays in 1960 moved its branch clearing centre to Northampton. And we've built on that ever since. And so Northampton now is one of our biggest sites in the UK. And Barclaycard, our credit card business, was founded there. It's still based there. The credit card was invented there in 1966. And we have operations in Knutsford and Cheshire. We're investing in those centres as well because they are significantly important to us. So the drive, I guess, in the 1960s and 70s out of London was in pursuit of talent and also cheaper office space because London was becoming so crowded, and that trend has continued. So today and this year, we, as you say, we opened our new campus in Glasgow in October. Very much state of the art. It's net zero. It does several things. We've renovated space that can be used for the public to hold community events. It's state of the art because we want to attract the best talent to it. And one of the reasons why we chose Glasgow, is well, four reasons principally, but very much aligned to the themes that we already talked about here. First of all, transport and infrastructure and connectivity, very important. Second, access to skills and talent, and universities crucial. Banks now are employers of not just IT people, but tech people and data scientists. And so actually the quality of data scientists coming out of Strathclyde University was one of the biggest reasons why we chose Glasgow. Thirdly, of course, the financial services ecosystem, which is critically important as well. So very many of the themes that you already touched on were absolutely relevant to drive. And the fourth area is around actually the quality and engagement of agencies working with government to work with us and build, to enable us to build that site, which was on a brownfield site. So, and I think that trend will continue. And the sites that I mentioned at the beginning in Northampton and in Knutsford and Cheshire, we're continuing to invest in and to build in order, as I say, to attract the best talent to come and work for us.
And do you think that COVID obviously has been very negative thing for the country, but perhaps one of the positive side effects has been this flexible working, this hybrid working? Will that have an impact in the way that Barclays works in the country?
So it's a great question, and I think in many ways virtual working has been something of a leveler, and it seems to me that there's a huge opportunity here to not lose the benefits that we have from virtual working as we move into a hybrid way of working, and who knows kind of what comes next. I think there are different challenges with each of those phases, but our site in Glasgow, we've been able to focus around collaboration. So people work better, we think, when they're together. And what's critical to an organisation, particularly the size of ours, where 2/3 of our people are outside of London in the UK, is that you need a strong culture to find the organisation, and that works. And I think it did work in the pandemic when the culture was already there and embedded. When you're not used to being in the same building or having that collaboration, I think it becomes a bit more challenging. And certainly one of the things that I've noticed being back into the office in the last few weeks is the ease of being able to have a 2-minute conversation with somebody as you bump into them and pass them in the corridor, which would take hours to set up if you were on Skype or on email or relying on people to organise something for you. So that collaboration space and using the space differently, I think, is definitely going to be a feature that firms think about for their physical sites going forwards, and that will create opportunities as well for people.
Thanks, John. And I will come to the audience for questions if people would like to ask them. But before I do that, and also online, if people want to email in, or is we popping it in the chat or the Q&As?
Yeah, into the chat, into the City UK questions.
Into the City UK questions for those of you online. Carys, thanks again for being with us. Levelling up is a key theme for our members, but so is sustainability. And we know that the IPPR has done some groundbreaking and very thoughtful work on the just transition. And I just wondered whether you could tell us a little bit more about that, because I know that you've not just looked at that in London, but in other parts of the country.
Absolutely, and just to say that I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but I didn't think the sector would thank me if I put you all at risk from COVID. So thanks very much for having me online. So the work that you're referring to is our Environmental Justice Commission, which was published this summer. And as part of the work, we looked at the opportunities that could be realised from the transition to net zero, and in particular, how seeking and realising those opportunities could create jobs and narrow inequalities around the country. So we were looking at more than a kind of regional lens, we were looking at other inequalities too, but that regional picture was of course really important. Now what we found in that research is that actually there are huge opportunities here. So we calculate that you could actually create 1.6 million jobs over the next decade through proper green investment, and that these would be pretty well spread across the country. So if you look at a challenge such as retrofitting a country's homes, that is something that would create jobs very well spread across the country. Opportunities like greening steel would support areas of the country like South Wales and the North. So there are a whole host of opportunities there. But to realise them is going to take investment, and that's going to take both public investment. We think we need an additional 30 billion per year, but critically private investment as well. And that's of course where the sector comes in. I mean, we set out in the report kind of how we think that needs to happen, but I do really welcome the discussion today as a kind of starter for 10 of how public and private sectors can work together for that goal.
Thanks so much, Carys. And I wonder any reaction, particularly from you, John, on the panel, the role of the industry in this transition to net zero. We saw a big focus at COP26. I think it was the first COP where there was such a big focus on the private sector, particularly on the role of private finance. I wondered what your reaction to Carys' situation would be.
Well, absolutely. So I think there is a huge challenge in terms of financing the transition to net zero, and within Barclays we're looking at how we work with corporates in particular that have got sort of upend their businesses in some cases and move to a net zero way of working. And that's going to take money, and actually it's not money that's going to come from bank debt. It's going to have to come from the capital markets because there is so much of it needed, and we have 4,000 or so mid-sized corporate businesses that are totally reliant on bank debt that are going to need help in accessing the capital markets, and it's this sector and this industry that's going to help those businesses access the finance that they need to make those changes to their business to move to net zero. So absolutely have a critical role. I think that came through very strongly, and I think from COP perspective it was the COP where finance really shone its criticality to the transition to net zero, which was absolutely profound.
And from your opening remarks, Andy, I think you see an opportunity here also for Birmingham and the wider region in being leading in this area.
Yes. But I think it would all be very easy for us to agree that this has to be done. I think actually there's a hell of a lot of challenging working out and all that. So I sat in a number of these discussions, not the main stage in COP, but in some of the side stages where, as Carys said, players were there in the finance sector. But what I just haven't worked out is how the return is going to be there. So let's take something like retrofitting, where there's definitely we're struggling with this at the moment. There's definitely a role for a regional authority or even a large local authority to consolidate activity, and the whole previous model of doing individual metropolitan theory is not efficient. I can see all that. I can see that there is a long-term return to the person who benefits from it, but I haven't yet really worked out the financing model around this. So there's a hell of a lot still to be done to make this happen. Do I think that a place that's got the piece itself should be on the cutting edge of financial innovation? The point about fintech has got to be part of things like this. Yes, I do. I don't necessarily think we've done it yet, but I know it's got to happen. That's the best answer. And right, come on, we've got to start.
We'll definitely send you a report on sustainable digital finance, which hopefully will provide some solutions. And Carys, just a reaction to that. I mean, I'd be interested in how the government responded to your recommendations and whether you think our industry is stepping up and what you'd like to see us do.
Yes, well, one of the things that we called for was the mandate for financial institutions to publish science-backed plans, which the government now has done, which is really good. I think we do need to go further, though, in terms of having targets for financial institutions and interim targets that align activity with net zero and the Paris Agreement, and for organisations to be held account there. Just briefly, though, I think the other kind of side of this on the policy aspect is that we do need a proper industrial strategy to give businesses the confidence and a direction to know where they should be investing. And I would agree very much with Andy that actually on this agenda too, we need to look at our model of centralisation. So I very much think that the mayors need greater powers to be able to lead the net zero transition in their area, for instance, with skills, with transport, with attracting business. And that's really critical and a much kind of under-discussed aspect of this discussion.
And we'd agree with that in our enabling growth across the UK report today, but in previous reports as well, we've long called for devolving power so that local government and metro mayors can do precisely that. Now, I'm looking around the room. We've had a lot of discussion amongst the panel, but I'm sure somebody will have a burning question. I don't think we've had any in the chat yet. Oh, I've got Miles volunteering, but others too. Please do step in. Miles, over to you.
Just out of interest, when you look at other countries, and I'm sort of thinking of all three of the panelists here, when you look at other countries who do this well, who is it we ought to be learning from? And in terms of driving regional growth, regional evolution, and corollary of that would be, is there more we can do in partnering with those cities and those regions in those parts of the world?
I'll get mine going first, because there's two really straightforward answers to this, which won't consider very original, but they're true. Germany has, of course, an incredibly structured regional government is. Indeed, some would argue it even held Germany back in dealing with the COVID pandemic discussed. But in terms of driving the regional economy, absolutely outstanding. And of course, the mayoral model in the States is incredibly well developed. But the point I would draw out, though, is this tax raising piece. Britain is the absolute outlier in terms of the proportion of tax that is raised and spent centrally. I think it has a 7% is spent locally. Tokyo, 70% is spent locally. So that is the underlying point, is the taxation model. It's not so much just the structural model.
Any observations?
Well, I'm just going to echo the point of Germany. I won't get into tax. But if I think about the country that was, or appeared to be quickest out of the blocks, if I can put it like that, post-Brexit, in trying to encourage organisations to look at their country for European hubs. Germany was absolutely up there, and particularly regional purpose.
And Carys, do you think there are any countries that we can learn from?
I'm just going to be really boring and say Germany as well. If you look specifically at kind of how different regions have fared, if you take a region like North Rhine-Westphalia that has had control over its economic policy making, it's had a higher GDP than the North, for instance, over the past 4 decades. So you can actually see that there is a clear causality from decentralising to seeing that higher economic growth down the line.
One thing I've never wanted, a very quick sentence. There's also a very clear correlation between decentralisation and better balance between places. It's not just the overall growth, So if you ask the question, which is the leading city in Germany for economic performance, I suspect we have 4 different answers at least in this room: Berlin, Munich, Stuttgart, and Frankfurt. At least, and there are different contenders, but they are very, very even. Our issue inequality. So that's the real correlation.
You want to level up and not level down. I had
Yes.
Richard first, but then I'll. Rick, could you introduce yourself? Because you've got people online who can't see.
Richard Kay from JP Morgan. I mean, since the financial crisis, the TheCityUK and the last leadership, and then we've done a huge amount in trying to tell the story of what financial services does across the country. And many of us are very heavily invested in other cities doing by anyone. And you're being here at this sign of how much effort we have made with important cities such as yourself. But do you think, though, that we have yet managed to make enough impact on politicians in Westminster who want to tell the story about how we have an impact across the country? And if we did, would it actually make for a better dialogue between our industry and the public? Because we may have had a good crisis from the pandemic, but I don't think we can be at all complacent that the public still sees us as being as vital a part of the nation's fabric and economy as I think you understand it to be.
I think you're right. Whether it's politicians who are the trouble here, or whether it's frankly soft media, I'm not sure. Because I suspect if you ask everyone they would understand that the professional services jobs are the critical ones, the most critical, most numerous in there. So I think it's probably a little inaccurate to say our local politicians don't get that. But I think there's still a national story which says the city means this place we're sitting in now, and that I don't think in the media that's going to change. That's why this Goldman Sachs thing is so important, because that can be true.
Do you think things are shifting a little bit? I mean, I speak from experience. Politicians do like to wear hard hats and high-vis jackets. We don't have any sites that you can come and visit in those things. Do you think that we suffer from sometimes that intangible nature of some of the business that we do?
Yes, that's definitely that. So I think I throw back to you. How can you demonstrate your value? And it is harder than if you literally got a car factory where people can learn seats and coming off the line.
Absolutely, we don't definitely.
Tom Sumter from Phoenix Group. I'd say HS2. Get the hats on for HS2. So right into your city. I'm coming from the other side. Obviously, public and private partnerships in the past have been checkered, but there's a real opportunity now to start again and look at being shoulder to shoulder with cities. Very keen to see evolution as well and empower those cities, but tailor the projects in which entice private sector money. You touched, Andy, on, I think it was retrofitting, the difficulties perhaps you're seeing in bringing capital to that play. From our perspective, or from Phoenix's perspective, we're like many other institutions. We have all sorts of risk capital available, from VC to investment grade, infrastructure like stable return capital. And I just wonder if you look more broadly than discrete projects themselves, you perhaps take a retrofit project with some transportation element which regenerates a particular area. And for the private sector, it allows a blended return where there is substantial risk being taken, but there's also some stable returns there that we can feel comfortable with. I'm sure there are lots of people in this room that embrace those conversations with you. I just wonder if you've considered those and you're open to it.
So I think the best response to that is to say, I know you and your organisation are well ahead in this thinking, actually. And I think it was in Glasgow when you told us about what we're doing in Bristol, and I take my hat to them for what they have done. So I think where we are in this, we're very much in the idea of private sector investors are now looking for private-public partnerships. I actually agree with the new and they're looking for baskets of investments, and we are working on a number of those big baskets of the best way. But we have not made a breakthrough that I know you have in Bristol on this question faster than some of these sustainability pieces. But I went back to that meeting last and said, "Oh, there's in Bristol. I've done this. Why haven't we?" So it's a good note.
John, Carys, any reflections? Maybe on the previous question, we've done a lot of thinking, haven't we, about how to demonstrate value of the industry. So politicians have moved.
Yeah, and it's difficult, but you know, we've had various politicians in Glasgow laying bricks, which is, you know, the closest we get to sort of hard to have the experience, I suppose. But it's we have created sort of TheCityUK 8 city chairs, and I think that's been a huge benefit to us in terms of being able to cut through and to engage more locally, both politically and also from a regional perspective as well. That's been hugely beneficial. So there's more for us to do, but and we have a conference in Bristol, not Birmingham. Maybe we'll look elsewhere in the future, but a national conference brought together for those city chairs and obviously people from across the UK. So and you know, the TheCityUK, to my mind, in addition to promoting the sector internationally, also about driving home the extent to which the industry is a UK industry and is not just rooted in London and the South East. That out there, about 2/3 of jobs, because it is that in itself is very.
Absolutely. And Carys, any final reflections from you?
Yeah, I'll answer that question about the reputation amongst parliamentarians, which I obviously can't speak for them, but I think there are a few things that, and this won't be a surprise to you, that the sector would want to focus on to improve its standing amongst parliamentarians. The first would be thinking about the stats that we saw today in terms of where there are the highest salaries in the finance sector, and that very clearly is in London and Edinburgh. And I think being able to spread where those really high value jobs are is critical to that perception of how that feeds into levelling up. The second is the extent to which the sector supports other sectors through its financing, and that really is, of course, a concern for politicians, particularly ones who want to look good in hard hats. But you know, the financial services sector is so important in enabling that I think that's a really strong case to make. And then the third is just showing that the sector is critical to the future that politicians envision. And so in particular, thinking about challenges like net zero, but there will be others, whether that's social care or the digital economy, showing that the sector is kind of critical to those futures so that it's not just a backwards looking conversation, I think would be very important.
Thanks, Carys. That's really helpful. We'll take those up, I think, and we can discuss those at its public affairs group, I think. I've noted those down. So I'm going to bring us to land on the hour. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Angelica for writing the report and enabling growth across the UK. We will send, we don't do hard copies anymore in this new remote world. We'll send out the full edition to everybody in the room and online. I encourage you to read it. You have a short form as well for those of you who don't have time to delve deep. And just to say, it's been a real pleasure to have Andy Street with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time. We know you're super busy, and we know you've got the Commonwealth Games coming up.
Yes, we have
very
been talking
exciting.
about this, which is recently, yes.
in Birmingham next year, and we all look forward to being part of that in one way or another. And thank you to you, John, from Barclays for being with us, and Carys from the IPPR. And just to say that we're always very keen to promote the role of financial and related professional services across the country. And as Miles has set out, it wouldn't be a TheCityUK event if you didn't use the 2.3 million jobs, 2/3 of which are based outside of London, but also that we are the biggest net exporting industry, bar none, generating a trade surplus greater than all the other net exporting industries in the UK. So, and half of those exports come from outside of London. So we have a real contribution to make and a real role in the government's levelling up agenda too, and we look forward to playing our part. Thank you again for being with us, those of you in person, and thanks for those who are online, and thanks to our panel. Thank you.